Hello, and a special welcome to the final lesson in Negotiate Value. We've covered a lot of ground in this course, and in recent lessons we've looked at ways to maximize our value in the negotiation. So we've talked about how to help the other party lower their costs so you can lower yours. We've talked about having them sharpen their pencil with a second and third round of negotiation. And all this after spending a full module on understanding what drives our benefits, and yet another on knowing what our options are and how to maximize our options. So we're probably feeling pretty good about the value right now as we move forward in our negotiation. There's only one problem, and that is we don't have a deal yet. We're still talking, we're still negotiating. Until we have a signed contract or money changes hands, we don't actually have an agreement. That is to say, you don't have a deal until you have a deal. Now, as simple as that sounds, it's a common mistake for negotiators to assume a close, either on the buying side or the selling side, before it actually happens. And in doing so, they lose some of the value that they've really worked hard for throughout the negotiation. And that especially happens when they fail to get it in writing. That is, they don't get the important parts of the price, the features, any other details of the negotiation written down. I'm a trustworthy person, I'm sure you are as well, but if we were making a deal together, I would insist that we put things in writing for a couple of reasons. First, we want to clarify and remember what we've talked about and make sure that we're on the same page. And then secondly, we do want accountability so that each of us follows through on what we've agreed to. Now, let's talk about how to approach getting the right things in writing. And you first want to look backwards. What do I mean by that? Look at the emails between you as you've had the negotiation. Look at notes from meetings or from conversations. Let's look at, of course, proposals that have gone back and forth and any revisions to those proposals. And those all contain clues of things we need to write down. So you don't have to write down every detail, but anything material you want to get down in writing so that the expectation is that's what will be delivered. And then looking forward, here's where we can use our imagination a bit. Even if we haven't made a commitment, we can say to the other party, now let's assume this goes forward for a few minutes, and let's play out exactly what's going to happen and the concrete details. Let's think about what the total amount is going to be that's exchanged between us. Let's look at all taxes. Let's look at all extra fees, anything else that might happen. Let's look at the delivery. How does this happen? Where does it receive? Where is it shipped to? Who's responsible for that? And let's look at any changes that might happen. Let's say we change things midway. How does that impact our deal, and how do we account for that? What you're really looking for in the negotiation is to avoid any surprises. Now, you might be a person that likes surprises in life, but in negotiations, you don't really want this in a deal, in delivery, after you spent a long time negotiating what the particulars are. So we want to avoid surprises, and the best way to do that is to get as much as we need to get down in writing. Not every purchase you make, not every deal you make will include a contract. Some will be sort of cash for a product or service. But in many times, especially for the more complex products or services, you will have a contract. And so let's go through a quick checklist of what will be in that contract and what you need to get in writing. And some of this repeats what we just talked about, but we want to get the pricing again, and we want to get the complete pricing, all aspects of it. One little tip here is to ask the other side, especially if you're on the buyer side, you can ask the seller to provide for you a sample invoice that's representative of what you'll receive after the deal goes through. This has been extremely illuminating with several clients I've worked with where they thought they understood the full cost, and then once they saw the invoice, they realized there were some additional components they hadn't really thought of. Now, number 2 on this list is features. Anything that materially affects what is delivered that we've talked about, we need to get that down in writing as well. Of course, the delivery we already mentioned. Who is responsible for delivery? Now, this again can make an important change. And I've seen this being something that's overlooked in a negotiation. If you're talking about the price and the price and the price and the features, and then all of a sudden you get to the end and you make an assumption that the other party's responsible for delivering the goods, they make the assumption that you're responsible for picking up the goods, that can be a substantial cost depending upon what you're buying. Number 4, what happens if things change a little bit? What happens if things don't quite work out? Are there adjustments that need to be planned for early on because there might be some change in how the service or product is delivered? Now that brings us to number 5, which is something that we don't really like to think about that much, but if things go south in the relationship, or if after a few years things just run their course and we don't need to work together anymore, how do we terminate that? Who's responsible for what? What's the timing for that? And are there any fees associated with that? These are important things to understand, especially when you're on the buying side and you're buying services or some sort of ongoing relationship. And the sixth item is risk. Now, this shows up in multiple ways on a contract. Limitation of liability and indemnification are a couple of the key clauses. Now, you'll notice that up on the top of the page, I've got a little disclaimer that this list is not comprehensive. I'm having you practice using your fine print eyes and making sure you see everything on the page. That's important in any contract. It's also important to get legal review where you need it. And for these items at the bottom of the page, I recommend getting legal review for risk items, for termination, because these are things that can make a huge difference and can really expose you to some serious problems if you don't get them nailed down. The larger the contract, the larger the deal, the more important it is to have it effectively looked at by an outside or inside attorney who has expertise that applies. Now, what you really want, though, is you don't want to end up with the attorney. You want a conducive agreement where both parties are really encouraged and incentivized to follow through on what they agreed to. And I want to talk about a few things outside of a legal agreement that help that happen. The first thing is, this should be a deal that makes sense for both sides. You should see the value from your perspective, of course, but also from the other party's perspective. If it's something where you're squeezing them too hard and there's not any margin for them, well, then that might not add up. Now, if we've gone through the course, we've taken a look at the other side's cost, the other side's margin, and so we have the tools and the understanding to see if there's value on both sides of the negotiation. Secondly, a great incentive is to have future business on the line. If I'm making a negotiation with a party that I might work with in the future, well, that incentivizes them surely to deliver what they promised, even to go above that, because they might have more coming down the road. And of course, if I'm able to refer them to other people, then that's even more of an incentive. Let's say I say, well, this is great. If you guys serve us well, I'll take you into our association and introduce you to some other potential clients. Now, that's not something I want to put in writing, but that's something that could be a huge incentive outside of the contract for the party to deliver well. Now, these are all positive incentives. These are sort of the carrot that's helping the horse move forward. Let's talk about the stick. That's the negative incentives. And that's important too, because the other party should have some sort of fear that if they don't deliver what they said they would, there will be some consequences that will be costly to them. And that could be simply complaints, or it could be bad evaluations, or it could be putting the word out on the street that they're not really living up to their agreement. In an extreme case, it could actually be litigation. It could be getting lawyers together, getting them involved, and then moving forward with some sort of legal action. I hope that doesn't happen much to you. And one key to think about to avoid litigation is to, again, before you sign the deal, look it over and just make sure it looks right to you. Is there value on both sides? Does it all sort of seem right? Does it seem to align? Do the contract terms align with the conversation you had before you started writing things down? And if it doesn't, if it smells a little funny, my encouragement to you is to pause, to back off for a second, to take another look. You've learned some world-class techniques toward approaching negotiation in this, and now, as you put this into practice, you will learn some instincts that will serve you equally well. That brings us to the homework for this week, and the homework for an ongoing basis, which is to practice and keep learning. Again, you've got an approach that's great here, it works, but it only works if you use it. So get out there, start negotiating, find opportunities to apply what we've learned, and you will see your skill improving and getting better and better. Early on, I share the business school advice that's often given to study negotiations, because in one negotiation, the reasoning goes, you can gain enough to pay for your entire education. Now, do you know the reverse of that is true as well? In one negotiation, you can lose enough that's more than you paid for your education. But even when that happens, even when the negative happens and you get burned, you can still benefit from this long term by learning from that experience and by applying it to future negotiations. So don't fear getting burned or leaving a little bit of money on the table. If that happens, it's okay. Just learn from it and move on. Make a lifelong commitment to become a better negotiator and to get more value out of life. I know I keep learning, and I love to learn from you. I appreciate your taking the course. I want to thank you for that. If you have success stories or ways that you think this course could be better, I'd really like to hear about it. And by all means, if you think somebody you know would benefit from this course, whether it's a colleague, someone on your team, a family member, or a friend, it's a low cost to take this course in money and in time, and as you know, you can gain so much more out of just one negotiation. So I think these are skills that will benefit anybody, and I hope you agree. My final wish for you is to get more benefit out of life for less cost and more value overall in every area of your life. Thanks again for taking the course.